All right. The last few sessions, I have been focused on fitness for entrepreneurs. This is and I've been calling them like session 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. Well, this is a bonus session. It should have been like the third session centered around fitness. This is, I don't know that I put this in the fitness category. This one is featuring a Krav Maga fifth degree black belt. I don't know if those things are related. Gershon Ben Keren. Gershon, thank you for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The fifth, did I do that right? The fifth
Yeah,
degree
yeah,
black belt. So there's
yeah.
black belts in Krav Maga.
Yes.
All right, and Krav Maga is if I'm not mistaken, is Israeli survival and close combat methodology practice or
That
thing
would cover it.
thing.
Yeah. It's it's self-defense, for a different context. So we'll teach military in a military context, law enforcement in a law enforcement context, and civilians in a civilian context.
Well, it's funny you say that. You were not my introduction to Krav Maga. About 10 or 12 years ago, I went through a session in New York actually with this Krav Maga expert. And I don't know if he was as expert as you, but more expert than me. Let's put it that way, Gershon. What I find really interesting is it's a very aggressive form of self-defense. And I read somewhere, I think this might have been in your blog. So you have this really, really good blog called the Krav Maga blog.com. That's KravMaga blog.com. So if you want to see Gershon, you would not mess with Gershon. Let's put it that way. The guy is like this thick, V-shaped, it's just pile of muscle is what he is. And he knows how to do things that would hurt people. So having said that, you got our goal. I got this. I think this is on your website. Our goal is simple: to give people the skills and the education they need to live lives that are free of violence. And that's like the first half. It's the second half that's entertaining to me. Or in the, I like reading it like that. Or in the case that violence is unavoidable, and I can almost see you get excited, help them hone the tactics and abilities they will need to survive.
Yeah.
Motherfucker. That's the way I kind of position that. Excuse my language here.
All right.
I think there's an E for explicit on this podcast. Hopefully there's nobody listening to this with their kids in the car. Little too late for that one. So before we get into my question, so what we're going to learn today is very much about how to identify high risk areas, how to avoid violence, situations where you need to be physical. I've done a pretty good job of that most of my life, actually. And then if you get to a point where you have to, what you can do physically. Now, it's very difficult to train over a podcast, but we can talk about it at least and educate people on where they can get some more practice. Having said that, let me give a brief introduction to who you are. You're an academic criminologist.
Correct.
You know, crime and stuff. That's what you read books about crime. That's what I understand.
And study it and do research.
Okay. You've got a background. That sounded very dismissive. I didn't mean to dismiss. I didn't mean to. I'm sure you know a lot about crime. I believe it. I'm not. I don't mean to. Gosh, that sounds like I'm dismissing it so much. I'm not. I'm fascinated by it, actually. You've got a background in psychology as well. You got a professional background in close protection, otherwise known as like bodyguarding and security. I think if we met once, and I think I remember you saying you were also a bouncer at clubs.
Yeah, we prefer the term doorman now. Bouncers a bit 1970s.
That is not the kind of doorman I interact with typically. The doormen I interact with are probably not going to drop kick you. You've also got 3 books in order. I think your first one was Krav Maga, Real World Solutions to Real World Violence. Krav Maga, this is the second one, Tactical Survival, and then Krav Maga, Extreme Survival. And I think they're on your blog, KravMagablog.com, if people want to see those.
Yeah.
All right. That's the introduction. Let's get into the meat. You ready to talk about defense and avoiding situations, and then if you can't avoid situations, the more entertaining piece of it, like going all Liam Neeson on people. That's
We can go there.
who would win in a fight? You or Liam Neeson, do you think?
Oh, how old is Liam Neeson now?
He's your age. And I'm totally
I
making
would,
that
I
up. I
would,
have
I
no
would like
idea.
to,
I
I
have
would
no
like to,
idea how old he
I
is.
would like to think it would be me. But it depends on what your definition of winning is. If it's a case of dealing with a physical interaction and then exiting, which is really what I'm always suggesting that people do, rather than me and Liam Neeson locked in a shipping container somewhere with a fight to the death. That's another matter entirely.
What about Liam Neeson in the movies? Not like real life Liam Neeson. Like my guess is Liam Neeson in real life probably isn't his stuff. You're talking about Liam Neeson in the movies anyway, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. All right. We're gonna come back to Hollywood in a little bit. Let's start here. Can give me a before we get into the juicy stuff of how to deal with somebody in a bar outside a bar when there's a little bit of alcohol causing some conflict. So that's like where my head goes when I think
Yeah,
about conflict typically is like just drunk idiots and hopefully us not being one of them. But talk to me
hopefully.
about your background before we get into that. Talk to me about your background, how you got into this, where you grew up, and the bodyguarding part, the security part. Talk to me about that. How'd you get into this?
Okay, very quick bio. So,
Doesn't need to be quick, man. Just slow down on the good stuff.
so I grew up Jewish in Glasgow, which is very much a city divided on sectarian lines, being Protestant and Catholic. So straight away, I was kind of outsider. So I was kind of bullied as a kid, and I think that was probably my first interest into violence. Like how do you stop being bullied?
What years was that you were
This
growing
was
up
in the
then?
night. I was born 1972. I don't think there's any secret on that.
Is this part of was this the era of the IRA?
That came in a wee bit later. I grew up with there was domestic terrorism. If you were on the mainland, then you would experience IRA bombings. Um, but as a kid, we weren't too much aware of that. I became much more aware of that as a teenager, and it was one of the things that prompted me to join the British military. So that's part of my story as well. Um, at the same time, probably my real introduction to security work came when I was 18 and I went to university. So one of the things that I was very aware of that my way out of this kind of Glasgow was a very violent city at the point it was a murder capital of Europe. And it was kind of like, right, let's get out of here. And my one avenue was like academia. So I went to university and I was also an active judoka. I practiced judo. And I went to a city where it had a very good like judo background. And that city also basically supplied the city club of judo supplied all the door staff. So I, as a naive 18-year-old, there was one time when like there was a flu virus going around and people were talking in the club like, oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to man the doors tonight. And I was like, I'll do it, and it was that kind of like, I've no idea what I'm letting myself in for, but you're paying me money to like stand on a door with one of the guys from the judo club. I'll do that. So that was kind of my introduction to working the door. And the first,
Gershon, let me interrupt for
yeah,
a second here. I've met plenty of 17-year-old kids in my day back in the day, not now. That sounds a little creepy when I say it like that. But I've met I remember over the course of my life hearing stories about people when they were, 17, 18, 19 years old and they were just like looking for trouble. Like the testosterone was brewing and they were like, let's go out, have a few
yep.
pints and like next thing you know, like let's just go have some fun and pound some face. And I'm wondering, like, to what degree were you on that spectrum? Like, where you said, I'll do the door. Was that because you were looking for action? Or is that
No, stupidity, pure stupidity and money. Like poor student, like I can earn a few bucks.
Yeah, I'll do it. All right.
I'll do it. And it was like I really had no idea. I mean, I'd grown up in a very violent culture, so I kind of felt like I understood violence. That was an eye opener when you actually start confronting it in a professional capacity.
I'm going to ask a personal question. You don't need to answer this. Was there violence in your family, or was it external to your upbringing?
External. I mean, one of the terms which we use in criminology is there's something referred to as recreational violence, which is people who just, like you were saying, go out looking to fight.
Yeah.
Glasgow, without going too much into the city's history, they broke up a lot of the inner city districts and created these kind of like projects, as the Americans would call them, around Glasgow. But they never actually put in things like cinemas, shops, and all of those things. So you had people who were kind of like living on these isolated communities who had nothing to do. And that basically bred, because Glasgow had a gang history, sort of like the formation of new gangs and recreational violence. So that was very much what I grew up with, where, I remember as a kid, and again, this seems unbelievable now, but you would have what were called the young teams. So these would be young gang members, maybe in their early teens. And I remember once like being made to fight another kid, and we were both given like some like baseball bat and a brick or something like that. And that was kind of the
say
culture.
It like it's cute, like
it's not at all. I mean, it's horrible when you look back.
It's wild. I think
when you grow up with that, it's just natural. That's the culture you grew up in.
What were your parents like? What did they do for a living, and what was your relationship like them with?
It was good. They were professionals. My mother was a teacher. My dad was an engineer. But, and this is actually one of the things to understand about like childhood psychology, that often people wonder, like, how can a good kid do bad things? So it's like, the police turn up, with the kid in tow, and they go to the parents, we've just found him like setting fire to dustbins, trash cans, and the like. And they're going, well, he's such a good kid at home. I don't believe that he does those things. And one of the things that psychologists found out, that kids will adapt to the audience. So if they know with their parents, they need to say, please, thank you, that's what they're going to do. But when they're out with their friends, they'll be swearing, cussing, doing whatever that social group does. So that was very much my kind of existence, that I was the kind of the good Jewish kid at home. But when I was out with my friends, I was doing exactly what they were doing. And I was part of that culture.
All right. So I took you off course here. So you volunteer, you're like, I'll do it. And you say, I'll take the door.
Yep. And I remember the first night, and it was at a club, which used to be an old like movie theater. So it had different levels. And I remember about like 1 o'clock in the morning, and the clubs used to close then at around 2:30, going like, this is money for old rope. I'm just wandering around smiling at people, giving a nod. Great, man, that's fantastic. You're having a good evening, all of that. And then somebody, and this was apparently a thing that used to happen at the club, they would have like a pint which was filled, and they would drop it from one of the like balconies onto somebody below.
It seems like a waste of a pint to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. And that was like the signal for everything to kick off. And I remember it was just like mayhem. And I'd never kind of seen like violence like it. It was just like that's a trick, boom.
It's like a movie, Gershon. Like, I cannot even fathom an environment like that. It's just like, I'm so sheltered. My God.
And the thing is, the glass wouldn't smash. It would actually be like an impact hit. So there'd normally be somebody kind of slightly dazed and concussed. Somebody would look up, see who had done it, and then everybody would be like rushing to clamor, and it all kicked off. And I remember that was kind of probably my introduction to what real world violence looks like, where it's not one-on-one, that it's multiple attackers, that it's mayhem, nobody's following a script, nobody knows how the situation should and will end, and you're kind of like thrown into that uncertainty. So that was kind of like probably my first real life introduction, forgetting all the stuff I went through as a teen. that was all very much kind of like structured. This was just like chaos.
Mm.
And then I started to understand why people working the door, were talking the way they were about violence and the chaotic nature of it.
I mean, I feel like you're halfway through the story. Like, what would you do being somebody who's essentially responsible for trying to keep things in order there? What would you do as a doorman in that scenario?
Well, things have changed a wee bit. So when I started working door, it was still very much kind of Wild West. It was still in that kind of transition of bouncer to doorman, door person. It only in the UK became regulated later on. So, so at the time, our strategy was to put on the biggest show of force that you could. So you would go in swinging, and you wanted to hurt people, and you wanted people to see that people were getting hurt, and that would normally have a bit of a calming influence.
Would you break out the judo?
Judo was fantastic. For one thing, when you're a relatively small guy, you get thrown around a lot. People will try and maneuver you. And one of the things that judo teaches you is to think when you're in that sort of like unbalanced state. So that was where judo was very useful. But on like the team that I worked on at that time, we had two Commonwealth boxing champions. We had a couple of like, one guy was a professional powerlifter. We had like kind of a phenomenal team. And at that time, striking was really the way to go, because you wanted to demonstrate to somebody you could like cause them harm. Nowadays, the judo's come much more back into vogue because it doesn't look too good the next day when somebody's got like, a bruised face and they're now going up before the judge or whatever, and, charges are being drawn up. So it's become a bit more kind of like, I'd say, respectable. But certainly when I did it, it was mayhem.
So you keep going with this journey. Like, I want to know how you got into Krav Maga. In fact, you live in the States. I want to know how you live in the Boston area. I want to know what brought you to this area, and how'd you get into Krav Maga, and when did that happen?
Okay, so I won a national judo title, and I thought that basically that would be my career, that I was going to be like a professional judoka. I ended up having a back injury, which basically ruled that out. And in a fairly despondent state, I decided to kind of like trace my Jewish roots and go to Israel. So I went to Israel, and at that point I was kind of mobile. I could work. I couldn't really compete in judo, but I could train. And I watched these two guys on a kibbutz that I was staying at doing what just to me looked like a mess. It was obviously some martial arts, but it was like a mess. There wasn't a structure to it. It was chaotic. There was a lack of form. It just looked a mess. Anyway, I'm a martial artist. I grew up doing martial arts from a kid. So I go over and ask them, what is this that you're doing? And they go, oh, it's Krav Maga. So this was the first time, maybe I think it was like 21, 22, that I'd heard about it. And I was like, so what's that? And they were going, well, this is what we do in the military. And they were going, why don't you come down, to the gym where we train at? I can't forget it, the same day or the next day, and you can experience it. So I did. And at the start, I was going, this is just nonsense. Like, I was used to very traditional martial arts where there was a very set way of how you blocked and how you moved. And I remember the first class, I was going to the instructor, like, what's my stance? Like how should I stand? And the question he asked me was, are you left or right-handed? And I went, well, I'm right-handed. And he goes, well, your left foot's forward, dominant hand back. And then I go, but where should my feet be placed? Wherever they're comfortable. And this as a martial artist was like, no. This isn't how you learn martial arts. In martial arts, you want the instructor to tell you that your left foot is, I don't know, X distance from your right foot. There's a width to it and all this. And these were guys who just gone like, whatever's comfortable, which kind of I couldn't comprehend.
So it's like form versus function. Krav Maga sounds to be very functional, and judo is more focused on the form.
Yeah, so one I would say is very precise, and the other allows for a lack of precision, which was kind of like a weird thing to me coming at it as a martial artist.
Focusing
Which,
just on the effects, the
yes,
impact. Yeah.
but there was obviously something about it which clicked. And, where I went like, they're onto something. I'm not sure what it is, but I thought, I could realize this was something. It worked. And it also appealed to my scientific nature. Um, because when we started talking, I was going like, so who does this? And they were going, well, everybody who comes into the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, is doing Krav Maga. So I was going, well, as a sample base, that's huge. That's tens of thousands of people who are being trained and tested in the system. So it kind of like appealed to my sort of scientific nature. Like Krav Maga was this process. We had a huge sample base and it was being tested. And if things weren't found effective, they were removed and new things were introduced. And I think that was what really appealed to me, because I was going like, where is the another system of self-defense on the planet that goes through that vigorous testing? And that kind of clicked, I think, to where I was having worked indoor and was going like, what they're bothered about is what's effective, not how it looks. Can people do it? There's a big stress on like how you will respond when attacked rather than how you want to. So in my traditional martial arts, it was all about being trained to make a particular response, where Krav Maga was like, this is actually what you're going to do. And that's a large part about it, which is why it's such an effective system of self-defense for ordinary people and doesn't require years and years of training to be effective. If something catches my movement, I flinch and I block, rather than doing a kind of traditional karate style block. So that kind of hit with me. So when I went back to the UK, I ended up finding, and this was, you're talking about early 90s, there was maybe like 2 or 3 instructors who were actually certified to teach the system. So I found a guy in London and started training with him. And then I started to going back to Israel and split my time between London and Israel and doing more and more training. And as I got kind of exposed to more of the thinking behind the system, I was going, right, these guys are on to something. When it comes to real life violence, these guys understand it.
Now, we met in Boston. So like, how do you get to Boston then?
So how I get to Boston is, so I'm running a number of Krav Maga clubs classes in London. And London is so expensive that you can't afford to rent a single place. So you're like renting off a gym. And they'll go, right, 7 to 8 p.m., you've got it teaching Krav Maga. And then there might be another gym down the road on another night. You're doing 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. or something like that. And what I kept finding was I kept getting bumped. Like you'd get replaced by the Zumba class because the Zumba class was more popular. And so it became like a nightmare to actually manage space. I had an opportunity to come to the States. I looked at what was the most European city of the States, and it was like Boston. And I went, right.
Wait,
I
if by
just want to
European you mean Irish, then you are correct.
yeah, and windy streets and all of that type of stuff. And it was like I looked at who was here. In New York, I knew some of the guys who were teaching, and it was like I could have probably set up and we wouldn't have been in competition, but I kind of, out of respect for guys like Ronnie Mazraki, who was down in New York, it was like I don't want to set myself up in competition with this guy. Boston, there was nobody who was like Israeli based. There were American instructors who had done American Krav Maga courses. So I didn't feel I was stepping on anybody's toes. So that was kind of like why Boston as a city came up for me.
All right, let's get into the meat here. So, I mentioned earlier, I don't know why I'm so entertained by this. I'm not proud of the fact that I'm entertained by it either. Like the questions I want to ask you are the same questions a 14-year-old boy would probably want to ask you. Like, how many times did you punch somebody in the face? And go ahead and answer that, by the way. How many times? There's been hundreds. I'll bet it's been hundreds. But that's like where my head is going. Then I have to like right size me. Like, okay, let's get a little more mature and ask real questions. So yeah, but first answer that one.
So I have a friend of mine who works in security as well. And he always refers to anybody who learns a martial art who's interested in fighting, that they have a dirty little secret. Whatever that is, like a kind of like fascination that they feel they shouldn't really be able to talk about. And we always talk about that. Like, for me, it was kind of like the empowerment, and this was judo to me, of being, as a smaller person, able to deal with a much bigger person.
Well, when you say smaller, just for clarity, we've met. It's your height you're referring to.
Yes.
I'm guessing. How
Yes.
you're like, I'm about 6 feet. You're a little shorter than me, but you are. I think you far outweigh me. You're
Yes.
broad and you're
Yeah.
thick, man, and you're not fat. Like, you are just like, you're thick. Like, there's no other way to put it.
I was built for judo. I've got very short legs and a tall body, very low center of gravity. I've got short arms. I was built to wrestle. And I put that
scary, actually. I mean, I know it's not very cool for me to say it, but I was in the marching band, so I'm just going to come straight out and say you're scary. If, like, I would not want to be on your bad side. I'm on your team. I want to be on your team. I'd probably be the guy with a clipboard keeping track of punches on your team, but either way, I'm on your team, man.
I mean, to answer your question, how many times I've thrown a punch, I've honestly no idea. Like,
but in real
no
life, the fact that you don't know is amazing. You know how many times I've thrown a punch? Maybe it was all in the same circumstances, like a handful of times, then it was over. And that was the last time I was like, I would think I was 16 years old.
No, and I think this is where door work in the UK differs from door work in the US. Because when I first came over here, I was like, I'll do some door work, supplement my income.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at how much it was paying, and I was just going like, I ain't getting into a fight for that. And then people were going, but you won't get into a fight. You're checking ID. And then I was kind of, well, I don't want to do that. Look, and this is not to say that I'm looking to get in to a fight.
But I want the opportunity.
It's
right?
the anticipation. That's part of it, like to test yourself, like what happens when, again, I'm short, I'm 5'6". When I've got to deal with like 5 members of the local rugby club who want to come into the club and we're at capacity, they're drunk, they don't want to take no for an answer. How do I solve that problem? Now, when I was younger, I looked more on how can I solve that physically. As I became more experienced, it was like, how can I solve this non-physically? And that became more of the challenge. But that was what the interest always to me with like doing security work was. How do you solve the problem? And if I'm just checking IDs, there's no problem to solve. So why do I want to stand on a, pub or bar door with a clicker?
Well, I'll tell you, because it's a high risk environment. I mean, you have a bunch of people that are either drunk or getting drunk, and there's a ton of ego. There's just high probability of interaction. Now, you were a bodyguard, you were in security, and then you were a doorman. Um, I would imagine being a bodyguard and in security, there's a much lower likelihood of interaction than when you're a doorman. Is that fair to say? Yeah. So, but you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared, but the interaction volume is way lower. Which actually, this all leads to, I think, that question. Like, I don't even know if this is the right question, but what are the most, I think I might have even answered it, but what are the most common situations where people run into violent conflict? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you say it.
So I'll turn around and go, 2 types of violence: premeditated and spontaneous. Premeditated is where somebody comes with the idea of using violence. So you'll mug it on the street. They've equipped themselves with a weapon, blah, blah, blah. They have a goal. You then have spontaneous violence, which is by far the most common.
You bump into somebody. Yeah.
Social interactions, everyday social interactions that have gone wrong.
Yeah.
And normally it's with somebody who doesn't know how to navigate it. So most people, like you say, you bump into them, somebody says, sorry, it's an accident. We all accept that's, what's happened, and we move on. But then you'll meet that one guy who doesn't know how to exit that situation. They take it as a challenge. They take it as a frustration or whatever. And they don't know what they want out of that situation, but they feel that the appropriate response is to become aggressive with you. And then the problem is that person who's bumped into that person doesn't know how to handle that aggression. So it kind of ramps up. And then at some point, somebody throws a punch. And that's probably the most common type of violent interaction that people will have.
I really like the way you clearly you talk about this a lot, because you position that so clearly to me. It's so easy to visualize that scenario and understand the people from a psychological perspective. So let's go through that scenario. Let's go all the way through beginning to end in that scenario, and feel free to use the whatever choose your own adventure paths you want to choose on this. But like you're at a bar, you're sober, probably the guy's sober-ish, you're having a drink, it's busy, somebody bumps into you, you spill a beer on him or the person he's with by accident, and you apologize. Oh, I'm really sorry, but he doesn't like that. Take it from there.
So again, apologies are good. They have their place, but they're not always going to be my default response, because when I apologize for something, I'm acknowledging that I'm in the wrong. And that
Sean,
person,
you spill a beer on somebody by accident, even if you were bumped, you're not going to say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry."
depending, I'm going to monitor the situation and how that person responds to me. So if somebody goes like, oh, watch where you're going, man. Okay, I know we're at a certain level here. So I can go, okay, I'm really sorry for that. But I'm still going to move on to my next step, which is what can I do to sort this out? Because at the end of the day, that person is looking to for a resolution to the problem. Your apology doesn't give them a resolution. It gives them somebody who's in the wrong, and so they can feel in the right. But it's not changed their position. There's no resolution. So what I'm looking for is for you to start, let's say it's, I bumped into you, I spilled my drink or your drink over you. You're looking for a resolution. That's what violence is all about. Somebody looking for a resolution to a problem. If I'm dealing with healthcare, it's normally that people have a long wait time and they become aggressive because they've been kept waiting. They need a resolution to that problem.
Yeah.
So violence is always about resolving a problem. So if I can say to you, what can I do to sort this out? When I say, what can I do? I'm taking responsibility for that. I am going to solve this problem for you. So what I'm trying to do is stop thinking about violence, stop thinking about aggression. What can I do to sort this situation out?
And you're literally going to say that out loud.
Yeah.
I'm assuming after it gets to a certain point. I mean, I would imagine, and at least where I go, 90% of the time, I'm so sorry. And they're going to give me a dirty look and be like, fuck off. And then you're
absolutely
done. It's over. And you just feel bad about it. But there's the scenario where the guy's looking at you and starts to walk up and get in your face sort of thing. And that's where it seems to me that you might say, hey, look, what can we do to sort this out?
So again, we're talking about navigating social situations.
Yeah.
So no two situations are going to be the same.
It's hard to
do.
So
sometimes there's going to be that apology. Hey, man, really sorry. That does it. Sometimes the guy's now caught in a loop. He doesn't know how to get out of it. Because normally it should be acknowledged it was an accident. There was nothing deliberate about it. I wasn't trying to undermine you in any way. And most reasonable people might go look, it's a bit uncomfortable that I've now got a map of Africa over my pants here, from the spill or whatever. But, no intention was there to actually undermine me, cause me harm. Okay, man, you're good. But then you'll get people who either due to high emotion, or maybe if they're coming from my background, growing up on a Glasgow council estate, go, there's only one way I should respond to this, which is I'm getting in your face and I'm getting physical. And I'm going to teach you a physical lesson. And that's where I'm now with my hands out. I'm managing distance. And what I'm looking for is the warning signs that tell me you're going to make a physical attack.
Now, hold on. Let me interrupt for a second. I've seen you do this. When you say hands out, you've got your right-handed. You're already your left foot's a little bit forward. Your left arm
out, right a little bit further back.
Your hands are flat and kind of pointing at 45-degree angles up, and your left hand's further out, your right hand is a little further back. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like, whoa, kind of like making this the noise of whoa. That's what your hands are doing. Okay. And so you're preparing.
So I have two hands.
Yep.
I mean, everybody has two hands, I guess. My
Not
left hand,
necessarily, but I
my
mean,
my left
mostly.
hand is I look on as my disruptive hand. My right hand, because I'm right-handed, is my power hand.
Okay. And that's back
So
a little further. Yep.
yeah. So I'm looking to do, and again, I have no official statistics for this, but when I talk with people anecdotally who work in the security industry, we'll tend to agree that the person who is most likely to survive the confrontation is a guy who throws a first strike. So I will set everything up legally by moving back. So I, you know, justify the legal requirements around assault. And I'm looking to make that preemptive strike if you give me any one of the warning signs. And normally it's just a hand into the face. That's my lead hand, my disrupting hand, followed by a power hand. Hopefully, it's going to deliver some concussive force, which allows me now to disengage.
No, I feel like we're skipping a few steps here. So what happens is like your hands out. I remember from the session I went to in this scenario that where you're actually striking, my word, not yours, but
Yep.
where you're actually like start going to cause some impact. They've moved into your hand, like and that officially
Yes.
their body coming into your hand.
So I
You're
move
not
back.
pushing them.
No. So I
And
move
if
back.
they slap your hand or something, that's immediately we've got aggression or the legal grounds for you to strike.
So there's two things to understand legally. And again, it's important to act legally. So I'm not trying to propose that we go back to the Wild West. I want to work within a legal framework. So for an assault to occur, a person has to basically demonstrate they have an intent to harm you, or you interpret that, and they have to put themselves in a position where they can make contact with you. Contact being battery. So unwanted contact is battery. So I'm moving back mainly for the CCTV cameras and the witnesses to go, hey, I'm innocent. I'm not being aggressive here. I'm stepping back. This guy steps towards me. They're actively placing themselves in a position where they can cause me physical harm. Yep, that's assault. At that point, I have the right to defend myself. So I don't have to wait for them to throw a punch or whatever. Under Western law, I'm allowed to go first. And I liken it to if somebody was to like point a gun to your head, you don't have to wait for them to pull the trigger to understand that you're in imminent danger. And that's what the person's doing when they step forward.
And
And again,
if I remember correctly, what you just said and what I'm recalling from the session I did there, your left hand, again, assuming you're right-handed and your left hand's extended, your left hand essentially you thrust it in their face, like
yeah,
just to like disorient them.
disrupt.
And then with your right hand, open palmed, I think is what you suggested. You
I'll
just that's the power hand, and you just pop it right in their nose.
and then you go. And the reason I teach open palm first is because we don't naturally make a good fist. So
So
if you want
the novices, you tell the first comers to open hand.
for quite a long time. So this is one of the big things when you look at like evolution. There's one school of thought that will go, our finger the phalange is shortened so that we can make a fist. There's another school that say they shortened so we could be tool makers and manipulate. When I see people make a fist for the first time, I'm turning around and going, we didn't evolve to make the fist. We evolved to be tool makers. Most people, when you look at the natural fist they'll make, they'll break the knuckles in their hand. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I want people to be confident in delivering power. So if you're not confident in throwing the fist, maybe you hit at 50%. Whereas if you're not worried about hitting or damaging the hand, you're going to throw 100%. So
I just want to be very clear, Gershon. I am not confident in throwing the fist. I was in a marching band and I work on computers. And if that gives you any sense of my level of confidence of throwing a fist, it should, because I'm telling you right now, let me just pause this for a second. I am looking for every opportunity to not be in a situation like this. Now, there have been circumstances where literally the beer situation where somebody bumps into you, your beer spills on the drunk girlfriend in this, like the scenarios I'm thinking of. The girlfriend like kind of freaks out. The boyfriend comes in to rescue her. Next thing you know, kind of in a conflict. I have never been able to not get out of that situation with words. And I have to tuck my ego between my legs, but oftentimes I can get out of that. So I am looking for every situation. And here I am, 55, man. Like I am not often in those situations anymore where I'm even spilling a beer
Right,
on
right.
somebody, let alone getting in a scenario like this. Um, and
So
also, I want to say that, like, I don't think you nor I, even though I'm turning it a little bit into entertainment, I don't think either one of us is encouraging violence and going out. But why don't you take it from there? What are you encouraging? Talk to me about
so
that.
so I've done a lot of close protection bodyguarding courses in my career, and you'll get two groups of people. You'll get the guys who get what close protection is, which is predicting, avoiding, and walking away from violence.
Predicting, avoiding, and walking away
And
from
that's
violence. Yeah.
because we have a saying in the industry, which is dead clients don't pay. So you don't ever want to put, the principal you're looking afterwards in any form of danger. So you're always looking to back away. The people, and this is not having a go at a group, but the people who've had the most difficulty on those courses is law enforcement, because they're taught to engage, where close protection is all about disengaging and moving away. So I'm all about, how do I get out of there? Put my ego in check. I'm never going to see you again. I don't really care. And I'm probably, if I have an interaction in a bar like that, I'm probably not going back to that bar. Yeah. Because to me, there's just a history there.
And you're not 17 anymore.
No, location predicts violence 6 times more than any other factor. So, like, I just won't go back there.
Say it again. Location predicts violence. Say it again.
6 times more than any other factor.
So you go in a bad part of town.
It's kind of, yeah.
Or you go into the rowdy bar.
But think about it. Let's just say, middle-aged, bloody guy who goes into a bar.
Go ahead.
At, let's say
my name. Say my name, Gershon. It's
6 p.m. 6 p.m. on a Thursday, and I get involved in an aggressive altercation.
All right, I'm out.
That guy who I'm involved with obviously has a reason to be there at 6 p.m. on Thursday, like a legitimate reason. Maybe work's finished, and that's where location becomes the biggest predictor of violence, because we all have kind of like regular routines. So if that guy's there at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, I'm there at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, that location is now a compromised place. I'm not going there. So, that's why, boom, done. I can turn around and go, I'm sorry, mate, whatever you want, but can I sort this out? Because I'm not going to see you again. I'm not going to be there again. Because, like you say, I'm not 17.
What are other? I can't believe how fast time is flying by in this podcast here. I'm going to keep you long if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Because I have so many more things I want to ask you about. What are some other predictors? I think I forgot the exact words you used, but basically you like want to predict, prevent, or avoid, detect and avoid, or something like that.
Yeah.
What are other indicators that something could go wrong? Other than common sense, man. Like going down a dark alley where you see people hanging out smoking something. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna stereotype that a little bit and just say I'm going backwards in that one.
Yeah. And my thing is, one of the biggest ones is who's got an interest in you. So, like, if you're in that bar, you're in the pub or whatever, most people shouldn't have an interest in you. They should have an interest in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at things like people who are target glancing, who are maybe like looking across at me and then looking away. So they're hiding their interest in me. And again, as a middle-aged guy, not many people have an interest in me. So it's like, as flattering as flattering as I could take it, I know that nobody should have an interest like in me. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at people who are scanning. Why is somebody looking around? Yeah. Are they looking for the presence of law enforcement, security, witnesses? Again, if you're in a location, you should be about your business. You shouldn't be about my business. So I worked, and this is again a little bit digressing, but hopefully makes the point. I did a lot of work with London Metropolitan Transport, so the tube trains in London.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest precursors that somebody was up to no good was when they entered the platform, they didn't look at the time of the next train. Because if you think about what you do, if you're a normal passenger, you want to know when the next train is coming. So if I'm not interested in that, what are you interested in? And so whether they were pickpockets, street robbers, muggers, that was like a baseline. You're not behaving like you should be in this particular environment. Now you've got my interest. And now I'm kind of taking note of you.
All right. There's where do we go from here, Gershon? I want
So many
to
directions.
you talk about two motivations, and I'm not sure if that's the right word. Two motivations of um criminal acts. One is when they're going after something, and another is when they're going after someone. Like something
Yes.
would be your wallet, your car, and then the someone would be like a kidnapping or a rape or something like
Yeah.
that. Like that's where they want the you physically versus something that you have.
Yeah.
There's different responses in those scenarios. Talk through that with me.
So I'll roll it a wee bit back because what we're really talking about is risk. And risk is the intersection of three things: assets, which one of which is you, or assets could be your wallet, your car, could be information, like data, where if you think about like fraud now, information is an asset. You have threats and you have vulnerabilities. And risk occurs where those three things intersect, where there's an asset, a threat, and a vulnerability.
Mhm.
And a threat is anything that wants or anyone that wants to cause harm to you or your things. And a vulnerability is anything that allows them to do that. So one of the things that we try and do, we can't eliminate threats, but we can reduce vulnerabilities. Assets come into two types: things which I own, things, and me, people. Now, if you want my assets and you put me in a position where you're posing a threat, for instance, and you want my wallet, I'm handing my wallet over. If you want now to move me, that indicates that whatever you want to do to me, you can't do here, and you need to move me to another location to do so. And that don't send good messages to me. So
No,
that's
hold
when
on.
I'm
Are you advising other people just to give up their wallet? Because I can't imagine a mugger coming up to you and being like, "Hey, man, give me your wallet," and you're like, "Okay, here you go." What would you
yeah,
do?
hand
Given
over the
your
wallet,
background and your experience, you'd hand over the
hand
wallet?
hand hand over the wallet every time. The
Wow.
reason being that person has come there with a goal in mind, that they're leaving with the wallet. And I believe that they have the means to make that happen. So they might have an accomplice that they can bring in to assist them. Maybe they have a weapon. Yeah. But I am going to assume that they are able to achieve that goal. So you can talk about all my experience, blah, blah, blah. Again, I've dealt with knife attacks so many times in the UK, and it's always been a complete mess every time. I have like little scars and nicks all over my arms and my body from people, dealing with knife. So I'm getting older, man. I'm getting slower, and my reaction times are going down. My ego is less fragile than it once was. So I'm happy to hand over the wallet. I wouldn't say happy, but I'm like
Yeah.
prepared to hand over the wallet because so many things can go wrong in a violent altercation that I don't care how prepared you are or how professional you believe you are. If you just want my wallet, there you go, man. But
Your phone, the
yeah,
car you're in.
whatever.
Um,
Boom.
Now, what about the other side of the coin? If they're taking you or a child or a woman is getting abused in one way or another?
My default advice, and I'll come back to every situation is different.
Yeah.
You want my assets? There you go. You want me? I'm fighting back. So even when I hand over my assets, so let's say you're a mugger who's demanding my wallet, that's not a passive act. What I'm saying in my head is, here's my wallet. You've had a good payday. What you should do now is go, because if you don't go, right, now I'm going to smash you into oblivion. So it's like, it's not a passive act. I'm giving you a choice by handing over the wallet. Yeah.
That sounds so Liam Neeson of you, by the way. Like, that sounds like exactly like something he would do.
And again, so there's a definition of trauma, which is people being placed in high stress situations of which they have no control. So I don't want to be in the situation afterwards of having a traumatic experience. So when I hand the wallet over, it's me going, I'm in control. This isn't a passive act. I'm in control. You've got a decision to make. I'm hoping you make the right one, mate, because I honestly don't want to get involved in an act of violence. But if you stay, you're no longer behaving like a mugger. You've gone off script. And now I've got to see you as a greater threat. And that means I need to deal with you physically.
Well, I think you're talking to the right audience. I think the listeners are all control freaks here, if they're anything like me, you know, where most of us are. I suspect if you're listening to this, you're an entrepreneur, and most entrepreneurs like to be in control. And you're right. Like, even though you're giving something up, you're still in control of this situation. Do you think size, like, so I'm thinking about that scenario where oftentimes not always, but oftentimes the attacker is going to have some size on the attackee, you know, the victim.
Yeah.
Does size make much of a difference when it comes to self-defense?
I'd be a liar if I said it didn't play a part. I mean, the reason that we have weight divisions in boxing, MMA, indicates that size and strength plays a part. What I will turn around and go is, like, speed will normally beat size and strength.
Running away from a big, heavy person is probably going to be, that's my tactic, by the way.
Or getting a thumb into a person's eye.
Yeah.
You know, so we use the idea of, like, nearest weapon, nearest vulnerable target. It doesn't matter if you're like 6'4", you weigh 280 pounds. Your eyes as vulnerable as somebody who's like, I don't know, 120 pounds, you know, 5'2". So I'm never going to try and go size for size, strength for strength. I'm always looking for that vulnerable target. The founder of Krav Maga had a saying, which was, it was something like, the balls of Muhammad Ali are as weak as the babies. You know,
so there's a lot of vulnerable spots, like the eyes, the nose, the neck, the groin. Like, those are probably the most impactful points of contact if there needs to be an interaction.
Honestly, like, thumbs to the eyes are probably one of the easiest things to deliver and have one of the maximum effects.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much in terms of technical competence to do it. What it takes, though, is the decision to do it.
Yeah,
like,
I cannot imagine that, man. Like, I'm sure in the right scenario, and I hope I never find myself in that scenario, I would like to think that I will behave appropriately, and that appropriation might be poking somebody's eyes out with my thumbs.
Do you have kids?
I do. They're old. They can defend me now, though. That's the difference.
So when they were younger,
yeah,
if they were attacked,
or my wife for that matter, you know, like,
what response would that, like, create in you?
It'd be visceral. Like,
so the question is, and this is what I ask a lot of people, is, if you're attacked, why can't you generate the same response? And again, it's not like you're going to answer that now.
Yeah, lots of reasons. I could talk to a counselor about that one, I guess.
Right. But that's ultimately what it comes down to. Why is somebody prepared to defend their kids but not themselves? And there's a lot of reasons why you can, but to me, it's like, why aren't you prepared to defend yourself? You're prepared to defend others. Why not yourself? And that, to me, is kind of the ultimate question that has to be, like, asked when we're dealing with violence.
What is there anything? I feel like I'm missing something. I'm scanning through all my notes, trying to think because we didn't get through. And this always happens with me. I go down rabbit holes with my guests, and I get so interested in the conversation that I actually oftentimes don't even ask the questions on my sheet of paper. I'm looking to see, is there something I'm going to kick myself for not having asked? Is there something you talk about this stuff a lot with groups and you train a lot of people. What am I missing? Is there an element of Krav Maga or self-defense that you think people need to know that we haven't talked about?
Maybe the separation of ego and survival. So there's kind of two reasons that you'll fight. And I think this is coming back to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
One is ego, one is survival. Never, never get in a situation where you're fighting for ego. Because when you're in that situation of fighting for ego, you're trying to justify your response. If my survival is questioned, I'll do everything I have to defend who I am. And so I will always look at like the spilt drink in the bar. If I'm going to argue with this guy, it's a matter of ego.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because really I should be just going like, hey man, I'm sorry, or what can I do to sort this out? Give me a solution.
I love that question, by the way. What can I do to sort this out? Like what?
It works on so many levels. Now, if you're now coming at me, so I've given you that option where we can resolve this non-physically. Now my survival is being questioned. Mm-hmm. And now everything's on the table for me to survive. And I don't have to think about like, and again, I'm still looking to disengage, but I'm not having to look at like, is sticking my thumbs in somebody's eyes an appropriate response? I'm like, if that creates me the opportunity to go, that's what I'm going to do. So 2 reasons why you fight. Never fight for ego, only survival. And then you don't have to question things.
You mentioned the law and like protecting yourself from the law, but that raises an interesting point is if at the very least, the best rationale for getting out of something is there's a very high likelihood that there's going to be extremely expensive legal bills associated with this interaction, and possibly worse than just paying for a lawyer or fines or whatever. And like I've read stories about people getting in fights, and next thing you know, it's years of a legal dispute between them and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I would argue, and I can't say categorically because somebody will obviously bring a case and go, but if you can frame that interaction in a legal sense, I took a step back, I put my hands out in front in a placating manner.
Yeah.
The district attorney is going to have difficulty in bringing a case against you.
Okay.
Now it's up to this guy to bring a civil suit against you and actually work out financially what you owe them. So it's now on them. Now, if you don't frame it in a self-defense setting, the DA might just go, fine, right, it's going to court. But if I can turn around and go, look, this is my story. The person started acting aggressively towards me. I took a step back, showing that I didn't want to engage. I put my hands out in a placating manner. They moved into me. I moved back again. You're starting to build up that story. And now if I have to go physical, I have a framework within which to justify that. And then if part of that is, and I don't know, I hit him a couple of times, realized I had a safe disengagement opportunity and went, it's going to be difficult for them to believe to bring like excessive force against me. So if you're always looking when you have to engage to create a safe disengagement opportunity, then it's going to be very hard for you to be found on the wrong side of the law.
Now, I know you're not a lawyer, and so this is not legal advice, but in the scenario where somebody is attacking another person and you get involved to protect that person, whether it's your kids, your wife, or whatever, do you know anything about the legal situation? I mean, I would imagine I can get involved and get them out of there.
I mean, it varies by jurisdiction, and I know that this is going out to different countries.
Yeah.
But in most Western law, if I intervene to get that person to safety, rather than that I intervene to cause the other person harm, and I can frame it that way, and maybe I needed to cause harm to do so, then I normally have a legal defense for that.
Okay, so I just want to say this, and I know maybe this is over the top and I shouldn't have to say this, but none of this is legal advice. In fact, none of this is advice. This is entertainment. This is a conversation with Gershon and me. And if you want to listen to it, cool. Neither one of us is suggesting you go out and get in a fight tonight. This is informational only. Now, having said that, one other thing you said, Gershon, as a way to try to get out of a situation is if you feel as though, I think this is kind of the last step, is you yell, like really a primal yell, back off with
Yeah.
your hands out. And oftentimes that's just another tactic that sometimes snaps people out of their rage
Yes.
and sets them down.
And if it doesn't, it puts, again, coming back to that legal context. I'm saying get back and I'm moving away.
Yeah.
I don't want trouble. So one of the things that you need to demonstrate, again, from a legal claim of self-defense, because when you make a claim of self-defense, you are admitting that you use force and that you use violence. You're just putting it within a context that allows you to do so. So if I have to hit somebody, I want to make sure that's in a context which is legally defensible. So if I'm moving back and telling you to get back, it's clear that I'm not the aggressor. And this reinforces my claim of innocence, which is one of the things that you need to make a claim of for self-defense to be like valid. Again, without getting too much into the legalities of it. I always turn around and go, I've got a kind of I call it an operational view of like the legalities of self-defense. Because when I was working door, I would have to be able to justify why I did what I did. So if I had to act physically with somebody, I needed to go. I did step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This person gave me no choice. That was how it got physical.
All right. Do you have a couple more minutes, 3 more minutes, maybe?
Yeah.
All right. So I want to go through a couple scenarios that to me just seem like potentially the kind of scenarios I might even today run into. Road rage.
Yep.
Somebody getting really angry, pulling you over. Now you're stopped. They're at the window or something. And I mean, I don't even know the scenario to paint for you, but what would you say about dealing with road rage?
In the US, pepper spray.
Oh, interesting.
Have pepper spray.
Yeah.
Like that person, don't get out of your vehicle. Like, because now you're basically engaging with the aggressor.
Yeah.
But if this person has kind of forced me off the road, and this is again how you tell your story, and now that they've kind of like hemmed your car in, and now they're at your, driver's side door, banging on it, pepper spray. Don't
That's
have
great.
to engage.
There's no engagement. It's just like you roll the window down and get them.
Just a little bit, just enough.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And then go.
Great tip. All right, next one. And this is one I actually have felt this many times in my life, where usually it's in a city environment. I'm walking down the street. There's some people hanging out. Oftentimes a group of people, oftentimes younger, and there's just you get this sense of threat. And they might be on the other side of the road. And there have been times where I'm thinking about this and they start to walk towards you across the road. At this point you're engaged, right? Like you can't turn around. What do you recommend?
Oh, so multiple attacker is always like a nightmare. And again, it comes back to that idea where you were talking about, would I hand over a wallet? Yeah. Many mugging situations we tend to think of being committed by a lone individual, but they're often committed by young people in groups. So again, why would I hand over the wallet? Because I don't want to be dealing with 5 teenagers. Doesn't matter how skilled you believe you are. It's a recipe for disaster. Put in the fact that weapons could be involved. Now I've got multiple attackers with weapons. Don't want to be in that situation. So things you could do. Is there something that you could use to put as an obstacle and a barrier between you to slow things down? Like, could you get behind a parked car? Could you then move to another parked car and
or
another
get behind
car?
you? I'm going to bring you with me and just, hey, Gershon,
I'm running.
Step
Believe me,
forward.
my little legs
Ooh,
can move me quite fast.
that's interesting. Yeah, well, that's an option, is right. You start to
Yeah.
run, but if you're with someone, a spouse or kids, that may not be an option.
And that's again where you get into a little bit of the third party protection stuff,
Mhm.
where I had conversations with my kid when he was younger that if I had to adopt that de-escalation stance, he was going to find the nearest woman. So I didn't have to worry because if I'm here, I want my focus dealing with that primary aggressor,
Mhm.
not having to think about his safety,
Mhm.
because that's where you come unstuck. And that can sometimes mean that you have to have, like, let's call it an uncomfortable conversation with a spouse or a kid and go, look, when you see me adopting this stance, it means somebody's being aggressive towards me. I need you to move to a safe space so I don't have to think about you.
Mhm.
And there'll be different people that have different views on that. But
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
just take that idea of like having that person knowing how to react and respond in that situation, it could be that their job is to move 5 yards behind you so that you've got room to operate, but the kid is still with you. So when you start talking about like who's with you, you're getting kind of into bodyguarding. And I used to like have to have these conversations with the people I'm looking after and say, look, if I grab you and move you behind me, it's because there's a threat in front of you, and don't fight me on it. And you'd be surprised at the number of people that when you do it, we're going like, hey, what are you doing? And it's like, man, I need you there, because I need to engage now with that person in front of me. So sometimes you need to have those conversations. I mean, it comes back to even like, natural disasters. Like, I'm not saying this directly to you, but does your family have a plan that if, like, I don't know, your street is closed due to like a gas leak or something, does everybody know how to act and respond in that situation? And again, this is the world I operate in, where I'm always thinking of like planning and preparation, and it's not just for violence, because when you're doing close protection, you're having to protect that individual in so many different like ways and facets. So, you know, often it's really having the conversations up front with people or having the planning and preparation up front that if like we can't get back to the house, right, this is where we meet. What happens if cell phone coverage goes out? Right, do we have another means of communication? And these aren't like ridiculous things to think about. Like we had in Massachusetts a few years back, Merrimack Valley, there was the gas piping was deemed unsafe. And they literally just went on a whole sort of neighborhood. No, you can't go back to your house. Like,
Mhm.
do you even know of the hotel that you're going to stay at? What you're going to do with your pets? And again, you don't have to get into like this manic, like prepper mindset, but there are just things that you want to think about beforehand so that you're not having to deal with them in real time. Because those will be the people who've thought about it that are getting the hotel room with the dog while you're busy dialing around trying to find a hotel to take you.
Well,
Does
yeah,
that make sense?
yes, it does, and we don't have that level of planning in our family. But we do have, we have a code word. So, like, if, and I'm sure you've heard of this from those, with AI pretending to be your child or your
Yeah.
spouse, and they're in trouble and blah blah blah. We need the code word. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you know how hard it was to get my kids and like, adult kids, by the way, my
Yeah. Yeah.
adult kids to acknowledge and remember the code word. It's like they've all been through school, they've all been to university, yet they can't remember a code word. So I think I've finally achieved that. I'm there.
And what you've done is actually something that professionals do. So we have always like a proof of life question and answer. So
Mm.
if somebody is like taken hostage, you want to know if they're alive when that hostage person like it turns around and goes, "We've got your," similar to the AI thing, and it's called like proof of life, and you have a question and an answer, and
Yeah.
like if the hostage taker isn't able to answer that question, then you know that they haven't got the person that they
Yeah.
say they've got. So it's a similar concept.
Well, Gershon Ben Keren, that's Gershon, middle name Ben, Ben, last name Keren. I look at this and I see it as like there's this phrase that I imagine, which is seeing something and avoiding something and then surviving something. Like first try to see it, try to
Yep,
avoid it, and then if you're still in that situation, try to survive it. And that's
correct.
what, to me, that's what Krav Maga is about. Um, Once again, I'm gonna say this. I think, and Ben, I don't want to speak for you. I think my understanding, the best way to reach you is kravmagablog.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that has a contact form that'll get to me.
And there's a picture of you. There's some videos in here, which is pretty cool. There's all kinds of cool information. You got your books here, which I have right with me. The Tactical Survival, the what is this one? Krav Maga, Real World Solutions to Real World Violence, and then Extreme Survival. Ben, I mean not Ben. Thank you so much, Gershon, for the time. I know we went longer than I said we would, but I really, really appreciate your time. This was uh, informative and entertaining to a certain degree.
Cool. In a strange way.
In a very strange way, but you're not strange, but it certainly is a strange topic to people like
Oh,
me.
totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.